Obviously, ancient Mesopotamian people didn't have computers, but they did worry about protecting their data. We just have to think about data in a different way than we're used to in our information-filled world of 2025. We have to think about it as tied to a physical material, clay in this case, and traveling at the speed of donkey rather than the speed of light. For the ancient Mesopotamians, data protection entails clay envelopes and cylinder seals rather than firewalls and passwords of our world. In our modern communities, we have lots of questions, especially right now, about data security. What information is recorded about us? Where does that information go? Who has access to that information? But concerns about information security are not new, and they're not limited to our digital times. As soon as writing was invented, ancient people came up with lots of ingenious methods to record information, to authenticate that information, and to keep secrets away from people when necessary. In Mesopotamia, the writing medium was clay, so some security measures are specific to that writing technology. For example, they formed clay envelopes around clay tablets, and they pressed seals and fingernails into tablets as signatures. But some other security measures are more familiar and applicable across writing systems, like writing in code or hiding information in acrostics. This might sound a lot like it's going to be an ad for a VPN. I promise it's not. But today, let's take a look at ancient writing technologies and cuneiform information security. Hi, I'm Kelsey, a PhD student studying ancient Mesopotamian history, and welcome to Wedgie BCE, a channel where we're going to dive deep into cuneiform texts, ancient writing technologies, and the weird and wacky side of Mesopotamian magic and religion. I know it can be really hard to find accessible and especially reliable information about the ancient Mesopotamian world, so on this channel I hope to not just share cool facts about history, but also explain how history as an academic discipline works, to think about the methodologies involved, so that you are better equipped to understand not just what we know about the past, but how we know what we know, and think about what we don't know or can't know about the ancient past. If you'd like to support my work as I make free videos on Mesopotamian history, please consider following the channel or subscribing on Patreon. I'd really appreciate it. Each of these videos is a lot of work. It takes a lot of time because I want them to be well-researched and detailed, so I would really appreciate any support you can send my way. Thanks. The oldest tested writing system is cuneiform, written with a stylus pressed into clay. The earliest proto-cuneiform texts come from the city of Uruk, specifically the 4th archaeological strata, dating to about 3200 or the 33rd century BCE. These texts are seemingly recording transactions, with boxes demarcating numbers and pictographic signs representing the goods being traded. Some of these signs are clearly depicting the object that they are indexing. There's grain, there's ceramic beer vessels, there are other containers visible on these tablets, but other signs are already abstract. We're not sure what exactly they represent just by what they look like. And those signs that are pictographic in origin become simpler and less obviously pictographic as cuneiform develops over time. Once things are written down, recorded, maybe more so than with just spoken language, there is more of a possibility that information can be used illicitly or fall into the wrong hands. Ancient people were smart, and they came up with several ways to protect their information. Paper envelopes seem like an obvious enough thing to us, with paper as our primary writing medium, but clay envelopes were used for clay tablets in cuneiform writing systems. In fact, the clay tablets actually predate writing. My colleague Danny Heber on his channel Linguistic Discovery actually just made a really great video laying out this theory on the development of writing from counting, so you should go check that out. The story goes that clay tokens were perhaps used to record transactions, and then people started collecting those tokens together and covering them in clay to make them one unit instead of random single tokens floating around. And then the contents of the envelopes were stamped on the outside to indicate what was inside without breaking the envelope. Thus, proto-writing was born. Denise Schmant-Besserat's work is the core of this theory, although the evidence for this is not as straightforward as she makes it seem. She talks about tokens that come from lots of different sites across Mesopotamia and Levant and Egypt, and across many different time periods. And there's really only one clear example of the token developing into a matching cuneiform sign later, the Udu sign for sheep. So this is maybe a nice narrative for the evolution of writing, but it's probably not so neat and linear in real life. Surprise, surprise. But clay envelopes are certainly part of this development. However cuneiform writing came to exist, by the Old Babylonian and Old Assyrian periods of the late 3rd and early 2nd millennia BCE, clay envelopes were widely used to protect two types of documents: letters and legal texts. For letters, envelopes were used to keep information private during transportation as it is passed from sender to perhaps a series of messengers to recipient, just like how we use envelopes today. Letters in envelopes, though, are less common in the archaeological record because the envelopes would have had to have been broken by the recipient in order to read the letter inside. Sometimes, however, letters weren't sent, they weren't received, or maybe they made copies, so we do have a few examples of letters in envelopes. Just like we do now, they wrote the names of the sender and the recipient on the outside of the envelope. In this case, the sender has also rolled his cylinder seal all over the envelope, perhaps to indicate his identity to the receiver at a quick glance, or without needing to read the inscription. We have to remember that literacy is limited in this period, but I also like the idea of the sender just doing this to show off his new cylinder seal. Legal documents, similarly, had relevant information on the outside, like the names and seals of the involved parties, and then all of the details of the decision or legal process are on the tablet inside, sealed so that they can't be tampered with. If something came up and the decision had to be consulted, the envelope could be broken and the tablet checked. That cracking of the envelope indicates that the tablet remained intact without any funny business going on. Envelopes were also used in conjunction with another information security measure, seals, which I've already mentioned a couple of times. Beyond that first layer of information security, which is literally covering the information from view, are methods of information verification. Sometimes we need to prove that the people purporting to be involved in a contract or transaction really are those people, and that they really agree to those terms and conditions. We sign documents to do this, but sometimes we need to get really important documents notarized with an official witness. But also in our weird computer world, we sometimes have to prove that we are actually humans. Ancient people didn't have to deal with this. They just had to prove that they were who they said they were, and one way to do this was with a seal, which is perhaps less humiliating than a ridiculous test. Seals functioned as a sort of ancient signature before widespread literacy. They were a quick way to allow people to indicate that they approve of a transaction or contract without them needing to know how to write their own name. Even on some of those very early token envelopes from the late 4th millennium BCE, seals were pressed into the envelope to authenticate the transaction. Some of the earliest cuneiform inscriptions have cylinder seals right over the text rather than on an envelope. Later, when many sealings were needed for witnesses or other agents related to a contract or legal matter, the seals were rolled on an outside envelope, not on the text itself, so that it remained legible. If there was just one or two seals required, they would sometimes roll them under the text or on the edges of the tablet, though. During most of the time that cuneiform writing existed, the most common form of seal was a cylinder seal, which, as the name implies, is a cylindrically carved seal about the size of a wine cork or a spool of thread. The ones that we have are made out of stone or mineral, though we do have some wooden cylinder seals from Egypt, so it's possible that those also existed in Mesopotamia, but did not survive archaeologically. We'll talk more about cylinder seals in a minute, but I first want to lay out a quick overview of other types of seals that existed in the Mesopotamian world. Evidence of stamp seals is more common in older periods, especially in Anatolia. Cylinder seals seem to have taken over in popularity during the Old Assyrian period of the early 2nd millennium BCE, when traders were traveling back and forth between Assyria and Anatolia and exchanging culture and language, along with goods like tin and textiles. However, from the Old Assyrian to the New Assyrian period, we do have some examples of bulla from stamp seals. Bulla are the lumps of clay that is stamped on, and sometimes these aren't tablets, but just the lumps of clay, perhaps sealing goods in transit attached to rope or on the box itself. We have a ton of examples of the so-called royal seal from Nineveh with the king fighting a lion, and some of these bulla even have the texture of whatever the seal was pressed on the back, maybe a wooden container or a cloth bag. This sealing has an inscription around it giving the date to a year of Ashurbanipal's reign. We have textual references to signet rings, maybe referring to that royal seal, and one text even has a royal employee expressing skepticism of the genuineness of a seal that he saw. But we don't have any archaeological examples of those signet rings. But we do have an example of a signet ring from the queen's tombs at Nimrud from the 1st millennium BCE. This is the seal of Hama. It's really fancy and gold, and it's both a ring to use while pressing it into the clay, and it has a hole for wearing it as a necklace. It was found buried with Hama near her head, indicating that maybe she was wearing it like a necklace. The inscription around the side reads, belonging to Hama, queen of Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, daughter-in-law of Adad-Nirari. Ironically, though seals functioned as an ancient means of verification, it's often difficult to know much information about seals today. They're small, tricky artifacts, and most of them, don't come from a documented archaeological context. And without that context, we can't reliably date them. Even without a recorded archaeological provenance, we could maybe have some information about the seals, but most of the seals that we have don't match the sealings on the tablets that we have, so we can't use information from the tablets to date the seals. Also, many of the seals don't have names, so we can't do prosopographic work to link them to people named in texts. Basically, we have to date them based solely on style. Also, cylinder seals are especially popular amongst collectors, and because there are so many of them out there and tons circulating on the art market, there's also potential for forgery. You can find a bunch of really crappy ones on eBay, but also I'm positive that there are decent forgeries that are in museum collections that were purchased. With that methodological information in mind, and we do need to keep it in our head somewhere when we talk about cylinder seals, we can talk about all the different styles of cylinder seals that exist, and they're really fun to look at. Cylinder seals often had a hole in the middle, so a string could be threaded through for easy carrying. Maybe people wore them as necklaces or attached them to the hem of their garment. However people wore or carried their cylinder seals, these were very personal objects, something that they kept physically close to them because it was basically like their substitute. Something that acted as a marker of someone's interaction with and approval of a text, be it a letter or a legal decision, even if they weren't the scribe writing things down. Remember, not everyone could write, but they could still interact with the tablet and mark their presence in the writing of the tablet with their seal. Some seals have textual inscriptions on them too. Some record the name of the seal owner. Some have the name and job of the seal owner. For example, this quite well-known example, the Ada seal, has Ada's name and his job, Dub Sar, scribe. Sometimes seals additionally include the name of the owner's father. Specifying the name of a person's parents, usually the father, is a regular practice in Mesopotamia because some names were really common, so adding the paternal relationship clarifies which person you're talking about. This Middle Babylonian or Kassite seal has a lot of text on it, and it names the owner as Mitatarshi, the Dumu or son of Abum Mutash, and it says that his personal god is Nergal. Sometimes the cylinder seals that we have are the only way to know the names of people in the past because there are no other texts associated with them. For example, Puabi of Ur, the only reason we know her name is because we found her cylinder seal. There's no other texts about her. Many seals feature animals in their carvings. This one, which is one of my favorites of all time, just has a ton of pigs. Here are some other examples of cylinder seals with animals. Some seals have hunting scenes, often with a central guy grabbing at lions, monsters, or ostriches. Some have religious scenes with gods or altars. Some have scenes of maybe everyday life with dudes hanging out drinking a beer. Some have more abstract geometric designs. These are usually older. As you can see, most of these seals have a lot going on in the imagery. To use a fancy art history term, this is a horror vacui, a fear of empty space. This could have been a stylistic choice, of course, but it also could have been a way to make replication and seal falsification more difficult. If there's more stuff going on, it's harder to copy. It's important to remember that seals were not something that everyone had. The only people who needed them were someone who regularly used them for transactions, or owned land, or was generally well off. Because they are a rather upper-class object, there are various levels of fanciness in the seals because they also functioned as a symbol of status. Sometimes seals had cute little handles carved in the top, often a sheep. Really rich people could even get gold accessories for their cylinder seals. Information can be physically concealed with envelopes, authenticated with a seal, or it can be hidden in plain sight. Just as people might show off their wealth with a fancy cylinder seal, especially learned scribes might show off their knowledge by putting secret messages into their compositions. And here we enter the Indiana Jones and Laura Croft part of cuneiform textual studies. We have a few examples of acrostic poems, some more obvious than others. In this text, called the Babylonian Theodicy or sometimes Babylonian Job, every 11-line stanza begins with the same sign, which you can see even if you don't know anything about cuneiform. And if we take the first sign of every stanza, it spells out the name of the author along with his title. Anaku Sagil Kinam Ubib Mashmashu Karibu Sha'ilu Ushari, which means, I am Sagil Kinam Ubib Mashmashu, which is a title for a magical medical specialist. I'll do a whole video on Mashmashu eventually. They're really interesting figures. Karibu, blesser of the god and the king. We don't actually have one complete copy of this text, but it is well attested with lots of other fragmentary copies, and we can put the pieces together to recreate the entire text. If you go to the electronic Babylonian library, you can see exactly how this works. We're missing 3 stanzas completely in the beginning, middle beginning, but we can figure out that those stanzas start with an E, a Na, and an Am because the scribe's name, which is hidden in the acrostic, follows a common pattern for Akkadian names. Unfortunately, this text is not intact, but we can see a similar thing going on with each of the stanzas, starting with the same sign. Here, based on what we presume is the acrostic spelling out the name of the god Nabu, Dingir, Na-Bu, Utu, we're missing the stanza with the Na sign first. And it's appropriate that texts like this are dedicated to the god Nabu because he's the god associated with the scribal arts, and so it makes a lot of sense to be playing with words and signs in a text dedicated to him. This text is a little trickier and not obviously at first glance playing with signs in the same way as the previous tablets where you have big chunks of text all starting with the same sign. But here, the first sign of each stanza, which is demarcated with lines, every 2 lines of text there is a horizontal line. The first sign of each of these stanzas spells out Anaku Ashurbanipal, Apli, I am Ashurbanipal. Shah Ilsuka Bulitanima Marduk Daldilika Ludlul, which means, I am Ashurbanipal, who is called out to you. Give me life, Marduk, and I will praise you. Finally, this tablet has 2 prayers, one on each side of it. This scribe is extra cheeky and announces the acrostic in the last line of both prayers. He says, Reish mihilti u kit mihilti ana sinishu ishasu. The beginning of each line and the end of each line may be read 2 ways. The first sign of each line for both texts spells out the name of the scribe, Nabu Ushebshi, and his title, Ashipu, which is another ritual magical medical specialist. The last lines of each sign of the prayer spell out 2 different things. The first one is fully intact. Reshu Mushapu Belutika, the attendant who makes glorious your lordship. The second is similar, but the second word is not fully intact. Reshu, it's been reconstructed as Mutnenu Palika, the attendant who does something and who fears you. There are also other ancient scholarly texts with obscured meaning with rare signs, or rare uses of common signs. In the Sumero-Akkadian writing system, each sign can represent multiple things, and each syllable can be written multiple ways, so there's a lot of play you can do here, and the texts that use these substitutions get a little complicated, so I'm saving that for another video, but anyway, those types of texts also exist other than just acrostics. Basically today I just wanted to give a little taste of what the ancient Mesopotamian world has to offer. But obviously I skimmed over a lot. Each one of these texts and artifacts could have been a deep dive video all its own. Later, I'll be posting some extra deep dives that focus on a single text or a single artifact. But today I wanted to think a little bit more broadly about how information security practices worked in the ancient world and how they're maybe a bit more sophisticated than you might expect if you don't know much about ancient Mesopotamia. Ancient people are a lot smarter than we usually give them credit for, and I want to highlight this ancient knowledge on this channel. Thank you for watching, follow for more, and I'll see you soon.